All right, everybody, Sapora here, marine biology class, and we're going to start off talking about the ocean. Shocking. Okay, so the first assignment this week is the ocean notes assignment for y'all, and it's located here. I haven't posted a video yet because that's what I'm shooting right now, but the presentation is linked here. You can click on that, or you can view it right in the page itself. And then there is a notes document that you will fill out after you take notes on this. So you'll kind of take your notes, the bullet point notes that we go over, and then you'll compress and synthesize them into complete sentences explaining, answering the questions here in an explanation format, giving as much detail as you possibly can in here. The more points the question, the more detail I expect in your answer. And again, incomplete sentences, as detailed as possible. There's only a few questions though, so I really just want you to summarize your notes and be able to explain it in a coherent fashion. Pretty straightforward there. And then the second part of this is going to be the ocean zones handout, which I'm going to do in a separate video for this. So that'll be on the back side of this, and you will fill out this particular page here, learning all the different ocean zones. And we'll talk about that in a separate video. For right now, I'm just going to focus on this first few slides here, slides 1 through 10. Talking about the different marine features of the ocean overall. Okay, so jumping right into it. There is an ocean maps activity that I have us do in this class where we learn the names of the major ocean basins and all the seas and other main geographic features of the ocean. But there are major ocean basins, and I would include in this one actually the Southern Ocean as well. So there's the North Pacific, the South Pacific, north and south. Those are divided by the equator, and because each of them has their own circulatory systems where they oscillate, move in different directions, so they mix, but not a lot. The North and South Atlantic, North Atlantic, South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Arctic Ocean to the north, and the Southern Sea to the south. There are within that, 60 seas and gulfs. So the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea, Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea. All of these have their own little circulation systems, weather patterns, tides, and other things that go along with them, and ultimately have their own ecosystems. Some of them more unique and distinct than others, but each of them amazing and special in their own way. I have a link here to a list of all of those, so you could click on that and you could look at the list of all of the different biggest seas in the world. Ooh, there's 77 that they have on here. You could click on each of those and then go to them and check them out. Helpful stuff. The ocean is really one big interconnected circulation system though, okay? There are different perspectives you could look at where you can look at the ocean and you can really see the Earth is just covered in water. And from this perspective, you see nothing but water. This is looking at the Pacific Ocean here from a more southerly perspective. But even though you have the North Pacific and the South Pacific, and then over here is the Indian Ocean, they're all interconnected. All of them flow and bob and weave and dance, however you want to say it, together. And one drop of water that falls here in the North Atlantic will take about 1,000 years to go through all of these different seas and kind of circulate the planet through the different circulatory systems that we have. So it's all interconnected. What happens in one sea affects another. What powers that interconnectivity and how the water mixes are winds and tides and the Earth's rotational forces itself. These are very distinct because what's driven by winds is really temperature differences across the planet, so that would be the sun. The tides aren't driven by the winds. The tides are driven by the gravitational forces between the sun and the moon and the Earth itself. And then the rotational forces is the Earth spinning right on it. So those are three very distinct physical features in physics, or whatever you want to say, features that impact the circulation of the ocean, right? The actual heating of the Earth from the sun, temperature, air rising and falling, gravitational forces, and then the Earth rotating. All of those impact and affect how the water on this planet moves and how I do these sick moves here. Okay, from a southern perspective, you can see that it is mostly water. So let's flip that over and take a look at that. From a southern perspective, you have Antarctica down in here. And then you have the Southern Sea that kind of surrounds it. It's its own circulation system spinning clockwise. And then looking at here, you have the Atlantic, the Indian, and the Pacific all kind of meeting down in there. And then if you flip it over and look from the north, you'll see the Arctic basin there in the north. If you want to know more about all the different seas and stuff, watch the video I have on oceans map activity, the oceans map activity, and I go through all the major ocean basins and seas and talk about them there. Okay, other fun facts about the ocean. Let's talk about some general features. 71% of our planet is covered in water. In fact, as one person said, it shouldn't be called planet Earth. It should be called planet Ocean because it just is a big blue ball when you look at it from some perspectives. And nowhere can you look at the Earth and just see land. Everywhere you see water around it. So 70%, 71% of the Earth is covered in water and ocean, salt water in specific. The average depth of the ocean, this is deeper than I thought, but it's 12,000 feet deep. 3,800 meters. Deep out in there. It's deep, folks. It's deep. So away from land, the ocean drops off really quickly. Let's zoom in here and just take a look. I'll kind of tilt things a little bit. Can I do that? Can I go 3D? Yo. It's not wanting to let me. I'll go down here and do it. So anyway, there we go. The Marianas, or not the Marianas Trench. The Pacific plate colliding here with South America and lifting up the Andes Mountains. A really deep trench in here. But out in here, once you get away from the edge of continents, when you fall off, when you go off this continental shelf, this big cliff that you basically fall off of down in here, the bottom of this ocean floor is stretching out. The crust cools and sinks, and it gets incredibly deep, and we're talking at about 12,000 feet deep. These are little areas where there's little volcanic ridges, and the ocean is actually spreading apart right in here. Google Earth is so cool. You could just, I get lost in here. I'm sorry. I digress. I love looking at this stuff. So 12,000 feet deep on average. It's really deep out there, folks. Not a lot going on down there. Light only penetrates the upper 200 meters or 600 feet, and really just the upper 300 feet of the ocean. So think about that. The upper 200 feet, and then right, infinity and beyond of just big, dark, deep, dense, cold ocean. Deepest point is the Mariana Trench at 11,000 meters or 36,000 feet. You could fit Mount Everest and Mount Hood in there on top of each other. And only 30% of marine species have been named or described. 95% of oceans unexplored. Google Earth it. It's cool. Also, if you think about all the different groups of animals on Earth, there are 35 different phylums, different groupings within the animal kingdom. That's right, below the animal kingdom, 35 groupings there. 34 of those occur right in the ocean. There's only one that occurs only on land. Many of those occur on the ocean and on land. Many of those are only in the ocean at all, such as cnidarians or echinoderms. Some of these big groups are only in the ocean, but there's only one on land. Life evolved in the ocean and then has moved to other places. And we'll look at some evidence for that here in just a minute when we look at the chemistry of the ocean and compare that to our own chemistry as well, which is kind of a cool way to think about it. There's the Marianas Trench, right just west of the Philippine Islands. Out there, the Pacific Plate is colliding parts of Asia and other things. Okay, so how did the ocean itself form here on Earth? Why do we have a blue planet, as they call it? Well, oceans first formed around 4 billion years ago. Our planet itself formed around 4.8 billion years ago. And when the planet first formed, this is like what we would call an accretionary stage, when everything is being amassed together. The sun formed in the middle, and then different orbitals formed around the sun where different amounts of material were collecting. The heaviest materials in the closer to the sun, in the bottom of the basin or the center of our particular solar system. So all of the stone and rocky planets, the heavy metals, right? Earth, Mars, Mercury, Venus, right in here. And then outside of that, there would have been another planet, but Jupiter on the outside, being the gaseous giant that it is, played tug of war with the sun and kept a planet from forming in here. So we have an asteroid belt. The gas giants on the farther out with the lighter elements, but it's bigger because there's more lighter elements, formed. And during this formation, right, as all these planets formed around our sun star, as our solar system was born, after they had formed and kind of pieced together out of all of this material in their particular orbital field. So everything starts orbiting in the circle, and there's lots of material in there, and that material starts accumulating and accreting and getting bigger and bigger. It's a snowball effect, and it keeps spiraling through and picking up more material as it circles the sun, and more material, eventually forming a planet. Even after that planet is formed, it is still spinning through that orbital that it has, and there's a lot of loose material in there as our solar system had just formed. This is during the accretionary phase, or right after it. They call this the planetary sweep up. We were constantly being bombarded by material from space, and the crust did not cool because it was just being slammed into. The atmosphere was very hot, but at about 4 billion years, we swept up most of the material. The Earth was rotating around. The climate cooled, the crust cooled, and temperatures dropped, and water vapor formed. So the oceans formed as escaped water vapor cooled from molten rocks, and the crust of the Earth formed. And as the Earth's surface cooled below 212 degrees, water began to fall as rain, and our oceans began to form here on planet Earth. Our present-day seawater was not always salty. It was, in the past, freshwater. When it first rained and the first oceans formed, it was freshwater. It has gotten salty over the last 4 billion years because as water evaporates and then falls on mountains, it dissolves rocks and materials, carries those down into the ocean basins, and then deposits the harder sediments, right, the parts that didn't dissolve in the water but just carried around as gravel, as sand, as even clay and things like that. Those are still molecules. Those are still minerals, mainly silicates, that it's carrying. Those just rain out. But things that have actually dissolved in the water, like sodium and chloride being the two main ones, out of rocks that stay dissolved in water, water will evaporate, and those things will concentrate in the water over time. So over time, sodium and chloride and other things have concentrated in the water while sediments have settled down and formed sedimentary rocks and things, making the water salty over time. So today, the ocean is 96.5% pure water, but 3.5% actually dissolved compounds, or anions and cations floating around in the water still. It's taken 4 billion years to get to 3.5%. So that's almost 1% every billion years. The ocean has gotten salty. That's about the rate. It's about 0.8% or something like that per billion years that the ocean is increasing in saltiness. So properties of seawater, when we talk about saltiness, what does that mean? The water is salty, it's not fresh. It means it has these certain dissolved minerals in it, and we're going to look at a table of those in a second. We measure the saltiness of the water. We actually call that salinity. We don't call it the saltiness of the water. We call it the water's salinity. And salinity is the total amount of dissolved minerals in seawater, right? And ocean is about 3.5% salty. We say we measure this by the actual amount of material, and so we want to measure that. So how do you measure the amount? We measure it in weight in grams. So the ocean is, on average, has about 35 grams of dissolved material per 1,000 grams of water itself. We express this in what we call practical or partial salinity units, PSUs, and freshwater rivers. Of course, there's 0 PSUs, it's just fresh water falling out of the sky. And saltier oceans and seas, like the Red Sea, for instance, an inland sea, which is in a really hot area. We talked about that in the oceans map activity. The Red Sea running right through the Tropic of Cancer, actually being in that dry environment, it's actually at 40 PSU. It's saltier than the actual oceans globally. Practical salinity units. I always say partial. It's practical. PSUs, just remember that. Salinity units. There are 6 major ions that make up that 35 grams, or that make up that 3.5% of the ocean's salinity. And those major ions are, I'm going to talk about this next one, nitrogen, in a minute. Those major ions are chloride, sodium, sulfate, magnesium, calcium, and potassium. These are the 6 major ones that you need to know. These are important for saltwater ecosystems, vastly important for saltwater ecosystems and for saltwater organisms that these are in there, and they're actually vastly important to us. If you look right at this, sodium chloride, NaCl, table salt, out of the 35 grams. They make up 19.35 and 10.76. They make up 30% of the ocean's 35 grams, right? Or they make up 30%. They make up 30 grams of the 35. They are the majority of the dissolved ions in the ocean water. Just those two things. And that's why we can get salt from seawater, or extract salt from it. Other ones in smaller amounts are still very, very, very important to ocean organisms and to us. So sulfate is one of those, then magnesium, then calcium, and then potassium. And if you think about this, magnesium, calcium, potassium, these are your electrolytes. These are things that all animals need to function for our particular metabolisms and even to build our bodies. We build our bones out of calcium, to a certain extent magnesium. Corals are built out of calcium. Shells are built out of calcium, right? And when we exercise, these are things that we need to replenish in our bodies. So you can't just drink pure distilled water. You have to drink mineral water because it has these things in it. Why do our bodies need these? Is our blood salty? When you get water put into you because you're dehydrated, you get a saline drip put into you, a salty solution, because as vertebrates, as animals, all life evolved in the sea. And so our entire physiology or physiography or our biochemistry is geared around that, is built from that template. And so here we are today, living on land with these saltwater bodies, so to speak. Kind of a cool way to think about it, really. Two things that are not on this list that are super essential, especially for photosynthesis in plants, are two elements. And these elements are nitrogen and phosphorus. And if you think about this, you have nitrogenous bases, right? And in phosphorus, you have that phosphate sugar base. And so we need these components just to make up cells and to do cell business. And so in order for an organism to build itself, you need those two things. You need nitrogen and you need phosphorus for the chemistry of life. And they're not just found around in the seawater. They have a source, and their source is mainly land, or rocks specifically. Peeled off, and it goes into water, but then it tends to sink quickly. It doesn't stay dissolved as an ionic compound in water. It tends to get used up, or it tends to sink, these two things, in the water. And so the main source for these two things are actually land, runoff from land, or even wind. Wind carrying out dust and then depositing it out into the ocean can help fuel algal blooms. And will actually remind me to watch a video of that. They have some really good footage of that. Take a look at that in class. So the source for these things, these two essential elements, limiting factors. If you remember from abiotic factors in biology, abiotic non-living things that impact living things. What non-living factors, physical forces in the universe do living things require to live and build life? One of them is an energy source, right? Electromagnetic radiation of some type or some type of energy. It needs water, just H2O. Here on Earth, at least, it needs the right temperature. It can't be, super freezing minus, 200 degrees or 300, and it can't be, like the surface of Venus, right, plus 500 degrees. And it needs nutrients or soil, and that's the nutrient soil part. It has everything else, but it doesn't have nutrients. You don't have life. So when we look at a map of where life occurs in the ocean, where does life begin? Where does life occur in the ocean? What areas contain the most life? On this map here, the purple is no life, the blue is little, and then to light green to orange to red, being the most life in the ocean. You might be surprised looking at this map. I know I was when I first saw it. I didn't think that just the middle of the ocean here, middle of the Pacific, I thought there'd be lots of life. This could be a productive place. Why not? It's not fully dark, it doesn't fully freeze, and it seems like a temperate climate. It seems like a good area. Off of Hawaii here as well, some of these areas, the Atlantic out in here. But these are actually marine deserts, just like the Sahara Desert. There's a desert over here. But instead of a desert, because the Sahara lacks water, this has water, but this completely lacks nutrients, those phosphates and those nitrates, nitrogen and phosphorus as well. The source for those is land. And so where you see the most productive areas are areas where there's a huge land source coming in. The mouth of the Amazon River right in here. Okay, mouths of rivers, the mouth of the Mississippi in here. Shallow lakes, even if they're cold. Or the shallow continental shelves up in here, the East Siberian Sea with all the rivers running off out into there. Super productive oceans. The Bering Sea, right? The northern seas up in here. The Labrador Sea, as well as the Barents Sea, all up in here, the North Atlantic. And then the Congo River coming in here, and then the Southern Sea as well. These are the most productive places. And you can actually see where it is being carried by the currents, right? By the westerly winds coming across the equator and pulling those nutrients out into the water there. Pretty fascinating that these areas are the most productive, surrounding the edges of continents and near sources of land. This is just a different version of the same map. This one is showing where life is most productive, or species abundance is on land, and it's a factor of those abiotic, or it is controlled by those abiotic factors. Okay, important things to note, right? A little bit of ocean geography and a little bit of why the ocean is salty. Most important elements in the ocean, what makes the ocean salty. And then two factors, right, that control life in the ocean are two elements that are generally missing from the seawater recipe that are brought in by land. And so where we see life in the ocean tends to be around the edges of continents where there's light and nutrients mixing together. You have light out here, but you don't have nutrients. So that's an important additive. That then fuels the production of plankton, which we'll talk about next week, and phytoplankton and photosynthesis. And then all of the consumers come in. We talked about in ecology, those connections, that energy pyramid, where at the bottom you have your primary producers. You have to have that bottom layer. If you don't have that, you have nothing else. So where's your primary production? Right in here, near land, shallow oceans, where nitrogen and phosphorus are being brought and dumped in and mixed with seawater. Boom! That's the start of kind of an overview of the ocean ecosystems. We're going to start to do a deeper dive into the specific names of some of these ocean zones, and I'll have another video I post for that. That's the second part of your weekly questions. That would be over in here. For now, on this video, just use those slides 1 through really 6, to be honest with you, to answer the first questions here. Okay, the first 3 questions that are on here, and then we'll focus on the ocean zones in the next video. Thanks, and that's the Tillamook.